Capes on the Couch podcast is for entertainment purposes only. Dr. Issues is a psychiatrist, but he is not your psychiatrist and does not have knowledge of your individual situation. For any personal mental health concerns, please consult your own healthcare providers. For medical emergencies, please call 911 or the designated number in your area immediately. Remember that you are not alone and help is out there.
Hello and welcome to Capes on the Couch, where comics get counseling. I'm Anthony Sitko.
And I'm Dr. Issues.
This is issue number 106, Clones, as suggested by Matt, our president-level patron. Real fast, speaking of president-level patrons, there is a president-level slot open in our Patreon. So if you go to patreon.com/Capes on the Couch, there is a president-level slot available. $10 a month gets you your pick, one pick a month for a character or a theme or basically whatever it is that you want to talk about. And we'll do an episode on it. Send us questions, anything you want to know about a particular character. We will answer them. Our selection is in your hands. And so you get one of those a month. So a slot has opened up. And you can be like Matt and send us awesome themes, or you can be like Ruby and send us off the beaten path characters. Or you can be like Ariel and send us Bat Family and Bat Rogues and anything related to Batman or DC.
I just want to say that you all may be wondering, depending on when this comes out, because it's been a couple of weeks, you have a Patreon level slot for president open? No one, tried to overthrow the last president. There was no coup attempt, I swear. This is all legit.
Wow, you took it there. Yeah, there was no fighting on that one.
This was peaceful situation.
Yes, this was they stepped down. It was Brian. Well, whatever. Listen, he has stepped down. He has stepped aside. He has been an incredible supporter of the show, and he's continued to be a supporter of the show, just in other ways. He's obviously, also a longtime personal friend of me and Doc. And he said, you know what, I've been president long enough. Let me let somebody else have the reins. So he's got one more pick that is coming up in the rotation. That's his swan song, so to speak. But then whoever the new president is can step up and start making your selections late February, early March, whenever we get around to actually recording those episodes. But in any case, clones, a fascinating idea. We have touched on for a couple of characters based on their history. Matt sent a lengthy, very in-depth explanation, as Matt is wont to do for all of his selections. And by the way, whoever our new president level patron is, you do not have to do this. Matt is just thorough as a human being. It's part of his nature. That's just who he is as a person. One of the reasons why we've been friends for so long. And I appreciate that he basically laid out everything that he wants us to talk about, which makes our jobs infinitely easier. But clones conceptually have been around in comics for quite some time. And he said, basically, whenever a villain has been defeated by a hero numerous times, the villain, evil scientist, evil organization, what have you, gets it in their heads, I'm going to make my version of this hero and use their powers against them. And it has been done ad nauseum. Marvel, DC, Image, Dark Horse, IDW, all the major players have used clones throughout their histories to varying degrees of success. And I think it ultimately depends on the writer and the character and just the story that's being told. But there is massive implications psychologically on the characters that we're going to discuss, because you can come at it from two angles there. And we'll get to this later, a little bit later on, but there's issues for the original quote unquote character. And there's issues for the quote unquote clone character, or the second, the repeat, what have you. And so each of them carries with it their own set of struggles and problems. But I think let's talk about one of the most famous / infamous versions in comics, and that is the Spider-Man Clone Saga, without getting into too much of it. The Jackal, one of Peter Parker's / Spider-Man's adversaries, decided to clone Peter and created Ben Reilly. And then there's Kane, and then somebody cloned MJ. And the Clone Saga really just sort of spread out. And the problem was, from a publishing standpoint, is that they had this very originally concise and tight story that they started creating these books that sold like gangbusters. And Marvel, for better or worse, said, well, these are selling like hotcakes. We can't just end the story. We need to drag it out. So what was originally supposed to be a handful of stories and a handful of issues dragged on for, I believe it was like 13 or 14 months, like over a year. They just kept dragging it on, and plot twist after plot twist after plot twist. And eventually the fans just said, we're sick of it because it's too much. It's overload. But at the end of it, Ben Reilly and Kane both became characters in their own right. And this was then repeated, I think, in a more realistic version from the psychological perspective in the Ultimate Universe, where Peter comes to find out that Spider-Woman, Jessica Drew, is actually a female clone of him. And then there have been numerous other clones of him. And Ultimate Peter's response is, I don't know how I'm not gone into like a catatonic state over this, because it rocks him to his very core. So let's talk. I could go on and on about the Clone Saga and positives and negatives, but let's talk about the impact that it has on Peter Parker, Ben Reilly, and Kane. So I'll leave that to you to start.
Sure. Well, you already gave the proper introduction to it, and a lot of it has to do from the original, and I hate using these terms, which says something about me, because when you're talking about clones, you're always going to have to come up with a way to separate one from another if it's not an obvious difference, such as by gender. And even then, I'm not sure that qualifies the way we think about it as clones, but that's going to be a way too much of a digression. To get back to Peter, on one hand, I could see a sarcastic and quippy Spider-Man thinking to himself, wow, I'm that important that they would want to do that. And yet that's definitely not the route they took. What they took was the idea that I'm perverted. Not him himself, but the idea of who he is and how he exists is no longer considered ideal. When we usually have the idea of wanting to have offspring or have children, it's not because for most of us, we don't want perfect copies of ourselves. It's that we're interested in having an influence on the future, and we want to have some role in it. But it doesn't have to be exactly the same. It doesn't have to be perfect, and it doesn't have to be us. Why is that? It's because all of a sudden we become expendable. Imagine if someone came up to you and said, we know that you have a certain talent gene pool, and we're just going to recreate that recipe and we're going to mass produce it. You're no different than the Twinkie formula at this point. So what do we need you for? That really cheapens the idea of human life, as a matter of fact. So if you're at that point and you see it happen, not just once, but more than once, then you really might think that the people around you, even if this is something that they've never said, that they don't view you the same way. You know for a fact that they're probably your enemies, don't really have the same perspective, and therefore they know that they can just find ways to figure you out and do you better. This is so absurd. And yet these are the logical fallacies that we go through if we have to do the type of introspection that's forced upon us. this isn't a meditation issue. This isn't a retreat issue. This is someone saying, this is you, or at least this is how other people see you. And it's now forced in your face. Deal with it. That's not exactly going to go over well for most people. I don't care how quote unquote well adjusted you are. So that's the Peter Parker side. The Kane side and all of those other, man, this is speculation at this point, because although we may have the technology, there's so much more to this when we say cloning, and I almost feel like I should give a background with that, but I think that would make this a 3-hour episode. But the point being, to be honest, you can't do this in a way that it's a Xerox, using the trademark, copy of someone with the same timeline. We're not there yet. So this really is still a philosophical piece, in the sense that ages and combinations, you're going to still end up with some differences, and you cannot remove the experiences that a person has outside of when they were born or when they were created, because we like to add this pseudoscientific term, despite the fact that any development, whether it's artificial insemination or surrogate parents or adoption, all of it still involves the process of a human being having an experience with other human beings and the environment and situations that they're placed in. So if the people that are doing the cloning want to recreate exactly that person, in theory, what they would have to do is they would have to recreate every scenario that original person was in. And even then, there's no set rule that says that the person has to respond exactly the same way that they did the first time.
That's the Boys from Brazil.
Exactly.
That's the exact plot of the Boys from Brazil, is they're trying to recreate Adolf Hitler. And they've got the clones, so they all look like Hitler, but they're also trying to recreate his entire childhood so that one of them will grow up to become the next Hitler. It's a fantastic movie. Gregory Peck. It's a classic. Bobby. Sorry.
You don't have to apologize. I feel like this is much more of an open dialogue. I almost wish we had a forum for this one, because, like I said, what I'm saying is purely speculative. I can't pretend to say that we've had these exact situations. We'll get to more realistic stuff later on. But to get back to the comic side of it, now you have expectations that are thrown upon you. We've done that numerous times, but it's different in the sense that we're not talking about expectations of what a hero in general does or what a villain in general does. This is exactly 100% what we want from you. And now that you've removed the moral boundary of quote unquote raising someone the right way, now you can really screw things up. You can just go ahead and really do that Manchurian Candidate type stuff. You already mentioned a great example, but still, the idea that you just remove those shackles, well, they're not shackles. They're constructs that allow us to live a much more productive, ethical life, as opposed to just going down every possible genetic rabbit hole that we could. It's the same reason why you don't have sex in public just for the sake of making a child. It's because you know fully well that two people just getting it on in the middle of the street might not be the best way to go about things, even if it does produce offspring. So
why don't we do it in the road?
Man, I don't even know how to continue with that. I know
that song. You know that song.
Yes, okay. I know I set it up. It's just, I'll admit, I'm not sure there's anywhere else to go with that. The whole point is, though, that I'm using the Spider-Man clone situation as just the whole point that you're opening up Pandora's box for things that you never had to consider before. And when you have someone who has intense emotional responses to things and takes things very personally, then it isn't just the philosophical general nature of it that is getting to Peter. It's the really intimate side of it that he never wanted to ever think about. And if you want to know why that's an issue, you could look up our Quipping episode. But on the other side, the other characters that don't necessarily have that style that Peter Parker has, or at least don't immediately have it, they may not have that coping mechanism. And therefore, they may not have to approach it that way because they have no background to do so. In which case, you're just going to end up with a whole bunch of pissed off people that want to just get everything figured out for themselves. And F you, mom and dad, I just want to do my own thing. I'm exaggerating, of course, but am I really? Because we already know how development happens in adolescence. So imagine having that, but then having it amplified because the person did have a preset agenda and anything that goes against it can literally be shut down. And you are on the expendable side. If the original person is having that existential crisis, imagine I hate to say it, the conveyor belt side where they really are treating you like that product.
That's one of the most in-depth analyses of the Clone Saga that didn't actually get into the comic storyline that I think I've ever heard. No, and I'm saying that in a good way. That's why you're here, is to offer that kind of analysis. I'm sure maybe somewhere, because the story's been out for like 25 years at this point, which is just hurts my heart, by the way, that it's that old. But I'm sure somebody somewhere talked about the implications of cloning and what that meant on Peter and Ben and Kane. Spoiler alert, one of the things that we are going to say for the recommended reading at the end of the episode is to read the Clone Saga. If you can stomach the whole thing, there's some parts of it that are really, really good. And then there's some parts of it where you just go, you could have cut this. This didn't need to be its own thing. But that's kind of comics in general. So then another famous / infamous version is Jean Grey and Madelyne Pryor and everything that went on with that. And if you want a little more of the history and some of the behind the scenes thoughts on how that all went down, you can listen to our interview with Chris Claremont from the New York Comic-Con episodes. I believe most of that is a Patreon exclusive, but if you subscribe to us for just $1 a month, you can unlock that and you can listen to Chris Claremont, the legend, the man, the myth, the legend, get a little testy with me when it comes to discussing Cyclops and the whole Jean Madelyne situation. But what that ultimately comes down to, that's a very interesting situation because that has a whole relationship and family aspect to it that we don't get with like the Peter Parker situation. Here, you have the whole thing where Scott, being the dick that he is, decides to fall in love and marry Madelyne Pryor, who is an exact clone of his first love, Jean. And then Jean shows up and Scott says, well, what am I going to do with the copy? I'm not interested in you anymore. I want the original. I want the real deal. And he leaves Madelyne for Jean, which is a whole like Maury Povich style situation. That's the nearest analog I could think of is leaving one twin to date another. And I did date an identical twin, and they weren't exactly identical. I actually dated the less attractive identical twin.
Oh.
And the one I dated was very insecure about that, but I digress.
But are you digressing? Because that really is part of what comes into this. Like, what does she have that I don't have? Like, quite literally, what? And the search for that answer is one that can take up a person's whole life. I mean, we could talk about that just as siblings, let alone being your direct duplicate. That's wow. That's the type of thing that makes me wonder. First of all, someone like Scott, and we went through our own situation with Scott being a dick, I know. But the idea of what value do you place on quote unquote authenticity? is the experience that you're having so unique with one person that you know that any other experience with someone else will not create that exact same feeling? I don't have an answer to that, but I guess Scott did. And as you said, he said, well, I want to be with the original. Well, what does that mean? Is it that he wanted the idea that he had simply been making a mistake? Is it that he wants to undo, which is something that's very common in psychiatry and psychology, that future actions somehow will intellectually remove what you have already done with previous behavior, which we know is not possible. But as long as you get some sort of emotional response that you consider to be more positive, then you're going to consider it a success. I don't want to say that as an advocacy for it, just the background as to why a person may go that route. Because is it really more ethical to say, well, I'm with her now, so long, ta-ta. I realize that you went through a lot of problems, but the decision's already made. Is that better? I'm really saying all of these things so questioning because it really is, no pun intended, a gray zone. These things aren't meant to have pure answers, and the more staunchly one side seems to defend their particular answer on these types of questions, I have the feeling the more volatile the response from the other person is going to be. I think I'm sympathetic to Scott in this case because there's no quote unquote winning. There really isn't. A person is going to be hurt by the termination of a relationship. That is inevitable. The question is, how do you help that person process the transition, whatever choice was made? And I could just deviously throw in the idea that my girl's got a girlfriend and I could be with her too, but not in this case, because this brings up another point. Even though this person was created biologically the same way, you never shared, or in theory, you didn't share the same parents, the same biological space, all of those things. How does that work? Do you still feel the same connection as you would to a sibling, to a child? Because that's really closer to what this would be. So I'm not sure. I wonder about these things a lot. And the Jean Grey Madelyne Pryor thing, I think, gives the best example of it. Is this a person that is your rival? If that's the case, then how much credence do you give to the idea that they should be treated the same way? Should they receive the exact same benefits that you do if they have the same biological material? Are you going to respond to the same physical stimuli? I'm really trying to be coy about this. What I'm saying is, did Scott notice something in the bedroom about one versus the other? And basically, oh God, I want to say tie goes to the runner, but dang, I'm sorry. I know we don't have to be PG about it, but I don't want to go into such intricate detail. What I'm really getting at people here is that, sometimes we're just primal, and if that's what it came down to, then how do you address that? How do you say to the person, yeah, I like what they're working with a little better than what you're working with? Just wondering. I did not plan on talking about this ahead of time, as you could tell, but I'm sorry, man. You can't tell me that you've been with two different people that are clones and then you pick one over the other and that's it? Come on.
Wow. That's why he went back to Jean. Because she gave it to him better than Madelyne could. And he had a kid with Madelyne. But he's like, don't care. When it's good. I'm just picturing, from Liar Liar, Scott and Madelyne. She's like, how was that? I've had better. Proving once again, Scott is a dick. So we've talked two Marvel characters. Now let's talk Superman. And Superman, by virtue of being Superman, there's been a couple attempts at cloning him, and two wildly divergent versions are Bizarro and Kon-El, Connor Kent, Superboy. Let's talk Bizarro for starters. Bizarro, depending on the version in the story, he's a clone or he's the polar opposite. But let's just work with the clone but opposite, because I just think it's a fascinating story. He has to be the exact opposite in every single way of Superman. And so if Superman has to save everybody, Bizarro has to kill everybody. Or if Superman has to rescue a cat from a tree, Bizarro has to throw a dog in a lake. I don't know. It's just like whatever the opposite is. And I know you being the DC guy, much more so than I, you've got more experience reading Bizarro stories. But I just think the character, just the concept is fascinating. But just the struggle of having to deal, from Bizarro's perspective, the struggle of having to deal with being the opposite of someone, particularly the opposite of a paragon of good and virtue like Superman, has got to be exhausting, if nothing else.
Well, I think this goes back to something that I'm going to reference where some people might get this and some people may not. Even though the biology of it is wrong, it still gives the same feel. Anyone that's familiar with the original Metal Gear Solid on the PlayStation, you got all the dominant genes, I got the recessive ones. Like, well, first of all, that definitely is not how genetics works. But the point that was intended was we start with the same base, and any opportunity that there is to switch what is available, you do it. So Bizarro may be the best manifestation of that. Specifically, the manifestations of the consequences of the cloning process that doesn't go the way you would expect, because we are not perfect at this process. But you don't have to go to comics for that. Do you remember, I'm not doing this as a quiz, just in general, even if you don't remember, the actual sheep that was originally cloned? Dolly, do you remember anything about that?
I mean, I remember some stuff. I believe we were in high school when that happened.
Around that time. The reason I'm bringing it up, though, is because that sheep aged rapidly. That sheep did not have a normal sheep lifespan, and it had to do with the telomeres at the end of chromosomes and how it wasn't accounted for in the process. Well, that's a simplification. It's not that they weren't accounted for. It was just simply the acknowledgement that they did not have the ability to say, oh yeah, we know that they're going to be the exact same length as they always are when the adult animal is finally at its expected age. But just one basic thing like that threw off everything that was expected. So from a comic book standpoint, it's not that far off. It would be more likely to end up with Bizarro situations than it would the so close you can't tell the difference except in bed situation that we just mentioned with Jean and Madelyne. But anyway, to get back to someone like Bizarro, now you have a situation where I'm going to focus mostly on Bizarro's view because Superman's view, once again, kind of speaks for itself. Bizarro's view is much more initially very childlike. If you're telling me that I'm Superman or I'm supposed to be like Superman and I'm doing things, then his logical leap actually is originally, therefore I am Superman. These are Superman things. It doesn't matter if they're opposite or not. So his point of view is your logic is invalid because I'm Superman. It doesn't matter what the difference in the behavior is because I already carry that biological material. So from that standpoint, not to mention the fact that he could kick your ass, I don't know how you're going to argue with that. There's plenty of logical ways to argue with it, but you're not going to get anywhere with him. And even trying to do it is just going to make him more angry because he's incredibly reactionary to things. So that's one side. As he matures as a character, though, you could definitely tell that he knows that things are not exactly the way that they were expected to be. And he goes through the full gamut. I equate Bizarro's arcs to the Hulk's arcs if you don't have any experience with the character. There's a lot more magic involved too, but I'm not going to get into that. Not to mention the backwards talking or the double. They're not double negatives. They're simply negatives. And the way you have to talk to him, if you want to say something, you have to make sure that you're using the negative version of everything. But no, I'm not going to, I was going to throw it away. I'm not going to throw it away. That's the whole point. The idea that he's developed a system that is so unique to him that it works with his powers and everyone has to recognize it because they can't process anything with him any other way. So he actually ends up in a situation where he is incredibly, dare I say, respected. He's at least acknowledged, because if you don't, you end up with worse results than if you just flat out said to him, Bizarro, you're acting ridiculous. So he's taken the idea of being the quote unquote knockoff and elevated it to an art form. So from that standpoint, it's the ultimate survival technique. Superman doesn't have to do that because he's, hate to say it, he's Superman. He's already in that spot. So he may have some of the similar initial responses to someone like Peter Parker where he's a little weirded out, but it's not going to go much further than that, only because, once again, he's Superman. He sometimes has that Smallville mentality raised by his parents, but there is also that Kryptonian, Kal-El, you are kind of the chosen one situation where he does put himself back on that pedestal. And I'm not saying that in an arrogant way, just more like, well, if this is just part of the things that people are going to continue to throw at me or society in general, then I'm going to have to find a way to roll with it. And he actually does start incorporating it. At one point, he has Bizarro in his own area where he can do whatever he wants and it doesn't have to cause harm. Then that breaks down. And then he has to make sure he actually secludes himself to master the art of Bizarro talk so that he can have conversations without getting into fights. He does what he has to. And he takes it in stride, which I guess is a part of what Superman does. I'm just gonna, I know it's clunky, I'm just gonna add in the whole Kon-El Superboy thing and all of that, because that actually is the closest thing to reality of what cloning would be. What we've talked about so far is how heroes deal with the idea of other people that are like them, but are adults like them, as opposed to how do you deal with the fact that someone is being groomed and developed to be you, but still clearly is in their childhood or in their adolescence and they're learning to be you. Not that the other characters didn't have that, but they weren't presented that way. And to be honest, most of the times in comics or in media in general, that's not what we do with cloning. With cloning, we're talking about this is the adult version of you, the exact same way as they would picture you, and what stories can we do with that, as opposed to this is how we're developing someone, because we do not have the temporal ability to say, all right, I want a fully formed clone tomorrow of me. We do not have that. I want to make that clear because I don't know. I shouldn't take for granted that everyone realizes that. No, we do not have that. So sometimes when that's presented, people think about Drosophila, fruit flies. That was a quick one. Well, that's because Drosophila time periods are days. It's much different. You got to keep that in mind. We're still talking about human timelines here. And if we're talking about human timelines, if I said someone has a clone of me right now, I would say, oh, really? What nursery are they in? That's what we're talking about. So it's much different. Superboy comes closest to that. And so from that standpoint, once again, it's more like, hey, if you give me the template, I can try and follow it. But that's much more of a parent-child relationship. And that's relatable. That's understandable. So now it's interesting how we're doing this. We're kind of getting into that realm of what's the more likely reality if we get to the idea of human cloning itself. Just to do that as an offshoot, I don't have much more material other than that, mainly because I got exhausted. As much as I loved the death and rebirth of Superman, I got exhausted on that content a long, long time ago. And if it weren't for the fact that they brought in Prime and did a few other things, I probably would have stopped paying attention to Superboy or and all that stuff a long, long time ago. And don't get me started on, adding in people like Damian Wayne. Anyway.
Damian Wayne, who we did an episode on. We did an episode on Superboy Prime. There's a couple of these characters that we've done episodes on, or at least tangentially related to. Let's talk then. Last example of a character is one that we've actually done already. We did an entire episode on Jamie Madrox. And so I don't want to rehash the point too much. If you want to go in depth on that, you can certainly go back well into our archives on our new revamped website, capesonthecouch.com. And you can find the Jamie Madrox episode. But the idea that all of his clones, now he's an interesting example because all of his clones split off from him at that particular moment. And so whenever he creates the clones, they have all of his pre-existing memories. They then go off, live a completely separate life. And then when they get reabsorbed, he brings in all of that consciousness and all of their memories. And if you recall, we spoke in the episode, there were a handful of dupes, as he refers to them, that didn't want to be reabsorbed because they lived their own lives and they wanted to be left alone. That's a fascinating idea that only Jamie Madrox as a character, because of his power set, is capable of.
Right. So I think we've come full circle. We go from the idea of the naive, okay, well, you can make clones, so here's a clone of you, to, well, we know this situation isn't perfect, so even if we try and create clones, there are going to be some things that go wrong, to, well, what is the timeline with cloning? We know it's not going to be exactly equal, so we're going to actually have to look at the whole lifetime progression of people and the transitions, because they can be decades apart, to now the idea that, quote unquote, we got it perfect. So now, no different than copying a file from one computer to another, you are now copyable. Like, in that sense, we've got it down. That's what Jamie Madrox is. That's who Jamie Madrox is. Let's say we're there. Holy crap. I don't know exactly how I'm going to exist in that world for numerous reasons. Number one, resources. People eat, people sleep. People have to do the same things that they do no matter what. If we're talking about populations, I don't know how any of this is manageable. Jamie does a decent job with himself. Imagine if we have a system now where it's not just that one person that can clone themselves, saying that we actually have the quote unquote printer line and the conveyor belt, like I mentioned. Now we just have a factory system, but we may not have a factory system. We may have much more the equivalent. I hate to say this. We're doing a lot of references today. In terms of the Matrix, like human beings, we're just we spread out. We're like a disease. We're now just proliferating any way we want, but then we're so expendable that we just however we want to as well. But we also have the system down similar to how physicists have described when we talk about the idea of teleportation in Star Trek. How does that work? Well, in theory, it wouldn't be that you are going from one place to another. It's that your material has been copied and the original destroyed. So if that's what we're talking about, and we have everything down to that perfection, then I'm not sure how we keep track. That's really what scares me the most. The idea that you have no idea. You yourself could get so lost in this whole biological mining system that you don't know where you are on the list. I can think of so many other versions. Oh my God, Final Fantasy VII with Cloud. There's just so many different things that come up with this where people have pointed out the intense psychological scarring and the need almost for amnesia to allow a person to be able to process day-to-day life. I don't want to have the idea that I have lived millions of people's lives already and have to filter and process through that on a regular basis. I just want to brush my teeth in the morning. The idea that we have to focus on one task at a time is incredibly important. I know we talk about multitasking. We're task switching. We don't truly multitask. We can do it with split-second decision-making processes. We do it rapidly, but it's still switching. We're going to tax that system if we had to deal with it this way. I don't know. I may have said all of this already in the multiple man episode. If I did, I apologize for repeating myself, but maybe that's because there's only one of me. I can't imagine if there were 500.
God help us all if there was more than one of either of us. I think the world would be a great place with a handful of you. There's a handful of me. We're fucked.
Oh, that's okay, because if there were a handful of me, you wouldn't know where they were. They would all have their own little points of the globe that they only have like one emergency distress signal. Boy, I'm really giving away too many of my secrets, aren't I?
The doc signal. So the last sort of things that I want to discuss, and I don't think it's going to take us too long because I think we've done a good job in referencing all of the individual characters, but just the ideas that for the original, in all of these cases, finding out that there's another view, that has got to be a mind screw on such a ridiculous level. I don't even know how to wrap my head around that conceptually. And again, I think that was done very well in the ultimate Clone Saga, where Peter's like, I shouldn't even be able to speak right now because of how crazy that is. So, I mean, is there anything more? I mean, I made a note and I'm just going through our notes, but as you can tell, after having, listened to over 100 of these episodes, we have general ideas, but we don't script things out fully in advance. So is there anything else that we can add about the fact that it's just a complete mind screw to find out that there's another of you floating around somewhere, regardless of what age they may or may not be at?
There are so many ways I think that can go. Oh boy. There are so many ethical concerns as well, because I know our original intent with this was just talking about real life analogs of who's your family and all of that. But I'm thinking more of the Henrietta Lacks situation when it comes to cancer development, cancer research. And I apologize. I'm going to kind of bow out in the sense that I'm not going to go into the full details of that. I think people are intelligent enough. You can read that for yourself, because that's a whole different diatribe that, from a personal standpoint, I don't want to get into. The only reason I'm bringing it up, though, is because it's directly relevant to the idea that your biological material is you. It's a part of you. And if it does good in the world, fantastic. But at the same time, I'd like to freaking know about it. And I'd like to say that, I had some control and had some say-so. So we already discussed just the idea of the existence of someone else. How about the idea of the existence of someone else against your will? But then now that person, and yes, they are a person. I know that's something that's come up in ethicist meetings. They have their own agency as well. Heaven forbid that person wants to connect with you and they want a relationship, and you have to be realistic with yourself and say, do I? There's no mandate in life that says that you have to be friends or close with everybody else that you ever come across. We've had that discussion numerous times. Even if it's someone that has significant biological similarities to you, but no other contact, no other emotional constructs up until that point, you have a choice. You have a choice as to whether or not that person now is a part of your life or not. You have a choice as to if you want to directly be involved in that. Is this a cordial thing where you just happen to make sure you know where they are and you know their existence and that's about it? Or is it like, hey, I want to be your mentor on top of that? Or, I actually feel like now I have a moral obligation to make sure your life goes as well as it should, almost once again as a family figure. There's no right or wrong to this. And that might be the scariest thing, because heaven forbid, what if that person views it the other way? They say, oh, no. No. I am a part of you, and you better recognize it. And if you don't, I'm going to have a worse life because of you. Like there are so many variations that this can happen with anyone that's either found out a family member that they didn't know about exists, or I'm going to actually relate something. So I actually have had genetic testing in terms of 23andMe, and it does give the option for family information, and I made mine very limited. But it still happened that a person located in Cleveland, Ohio, biologically is a second cousin, but was adopted a long time ago, and simply asked me by my real name, like, "Hey, are you such and such?" And I gave the basic information I could, and they were very thankful, and that's all I heard, because they weren't really pursuing beyond that. They were just trying to flesh out their biological family tree. It could have ended there. For all I know, they could have looked up, "Hey, you're a doctor. You must have, a whole bunch of money. Let me see if I can ingratiate, myself towards you and see if I could milk you for all it's worth because we're long lost family." Whatever. I'm making that up. I'm saying not the 23andMe part. That's true. But I'm saying these sorts of things can go all sorts of different directions, and all of them are emotionally valid. They're all totally understandable reaction. What the next step is, I have no idea. That's what makes some of these situations so fascinating. There's nothing to say that you can script out. You just deal with it in the moment. And when you do deal with it in the moment, you make sure that you have enough people in your corner to help you process it. But we'll get into that in the next section.
Yeah. And so then the last bit, and I hate how, I don't want to say disjointed this is, but I feel like this episode is just, here's the issue and then you talk. Here's the next issue and then you talk. But there's just so much here to mine from a psychological standpoint that I don't want to miss anything. So I apologize if this episode is coming across a little more just boom, 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 boom than some of the previous thematic ones, but I want to make sure we cover all the bases. The issues for the clone then, and like I said, we talked about it with Strife where he was just this flat rejection, but how else would you come to terms with the fact that you're not an original, that you are not who you thought you were, regardless of what, which coach was that? They are who we thought they were.
That's
Dennis Green.
Dennis Green.
They were who we thought they were.
Yep.
What happens when that's not the case? When you are not the original? Because I think the notion of identity and uniqueness is so intrinsic to everyone, even twins, regardless of the visual aspect, still have that, yeah, somebody looks like me, but I'm still my own person. We may be genetically the same, but we still have different life experiences, even if we've done many things together. There is still that notion of uniqueness. If that is taken away from you, or that you were created because of someone else, and you were created, especially somebody like the Spider-Man Clone Saga, or like any of these other characters where you were created specifically because this other person was chosen for their uniqueness, and you have all these traits, but you're the copy. That's gotta be really damaging.
It can be. Yes, it certainly can be. Boy, oh boy. I can't help it because I'm a sports-minded person, so this is not meant to be a hot take. I'm just gonna use them because they're kind of known right now, and in the NBA, it was pretty cool. So the whole Ball family, when you talk about LeVar and LaMelo and LiAngelo and all, like, okay, anyway, the whole point is they clearly are their own people. They're not clones, but you can tell based on their father, this is all that they were set up to do. And that was shoved down their throats. And the fact that all of them are still going into it, and this is the important part. Society has deemed it, at least the people relevant to that society have deemed it appropriate, and therefore they've been drafted highly. They get a lot of attention. They are making some sort of significant monetary gain from all of this. So that can be a positive side to this, where if you know for a fact that basically you were just set up from Jump Street with genetic material to just run with and go down this path and things will be simple for you, Godspeed. Enjoy your life. Don't worry about it. Not going to make a mountain out of a molehill. What Anthony's bringing up with being the exact opposite, what happens though, and I'm saying this purely as a speculation point, but you don't necessarily need a speculation point. There have been presidents that have offshoot brothers that get known for other things related not to the presidency, but to more embarrassing things, or just, things that it's like, you're related? How is that possible? And that's not even talking about the clone part. The idea that now it's you? What happens there? That someone else is now... They must really have thought, when someone's giving their information, that they're supposed to be the best. They are supposed to be the greatest. They are supposed to be this such and such person. Because what I'm going with in reality is you can't just automatically say they're the same person. If you're doing that, you're already starting from a base of fraud. You cannot say that a person is exactly the same as some other person, whether it's twins or not. There has to be some separation point. If you do not do that, then you're actually violating something pretty significant. You can even give someone the same name, but they still ask, what is the differential identifier? There has to be something. If you're not doing that for a person, then you really are setting them up to be screwed up. Sorry to say. You mentioned it with twins, though, even having their own identities. Well, it's funny that you mentioned that, because how many twins, and if you're listening to this, you can help me with this. How many twins do that thing where their parents have them with different clothes or different hairstyles or just these little things, and the twins themselves intentionally swap? Why do they do that? They know it creates a huge emotional turmoil in the people around them. But here's the interesting thing. That's why they do it. They do it because it's fun. Why is it fun for them? Because they never once questioned their own existence. We're going beyond that now to the existential idea that somehow, some way, the original information was wrong. Now, we've had this discussion before. It's one of two things. Are you stupid or are you corrupt? Were people misleading them intentionally? Or was it simply one of those foibles that happens in life? Unfortunately, our emotions don't usually tell the difference. It could still have the same impact for that person. But it doesn't have to. And I know I'm giving a bit of an out. I don't want to make it sound like it's automatically something that has to cause this intense strife, but it can. The reason is the lack of control. If you feel like you're not in control of your own life, then you're going to have anxiety, you're going to have depression, you're going to have anger, you're going to have the full spectrum. Someone saying you're not who you say you are, in general, you're not really usually going to have that big a reaction other than being bewilderment, as you could see on my face, because I know who I am. It doesn't matter what you say. So you can brush it off. The problem will become when, let's go ahead and let's make it real. Your parents decide to have that talk, son or daughter, there's some things we haven't told you. And it doesn't have to be the genetic side. It can be the other side. It could be that you were adopted. It could be so many, there's just so many variations on this. But just the idea that someone has to hold things back, maybe they thought it was in your best interest. Maybe it definitely was in your best interest. That may not make it less painful. So, once again, this is one of those situations where all of this was off the cuff and we're still cranking out a pretty deep episode here. if I give more examples, if I keep going with this, man, we're going to end up doubling the length of this. So I think we need to cut it off, not because I don't have more to say, but because it's pretty obvious. And there are whole massive organizations to discuss this on a pretty heavy basis to make sure that we have the proper ethical rigor about cloning, that we don't bring these regular routine things that happen in basic families about siblings, offspring, and et cetera, twins, triplets, all of those considerations, that we don't bring all of those things into cloning automatically and just mess up the world.
Well, I was going to say that I know we can go on, but there is one more area that I do want to address, because we've been talking so far about all of these comic characters, but there's a whole host of real world analogues that we can definitely go into. And I want to make sure we cover our bases, because I think this is, our listeners can take all that stuff and then apply it to the scenarios that we're going to address here. And, we can talk about the idea that your family history is not what it was, or that somebody lied to you about your past. And to bring it to a famous yet real world example, Bobby Darin, for a long time, grew up believing that the woman that he thought was his older sister was actually his mother. That I believe she was 13 or 14 when she got pregnant. And this being back in the day, she was in a family way, and they couldn't just say, well, she got pregnant. So she had the baby, and they convinced Bobby that his mother was his older sister. And it wasn't until much later on in his life that it was revealed to him that, no, that's actually your mom. And that really did a number on him. So that's a famous example. And I can only imagine that that's not an isolated incident, that especially now, you were talking about the family testing that you did with 23andMe. I've been on Ancestry.com for about 20 years researching my family and going through now with the genetic testing and so on and so forth. My mother and father are very big on the research, and they basically do this like every day. This is their hobby now. And they help other people that we're related to, because they, we've all done the genetic testing and stuff, and we get messages all the time from people. And my mother's in the process of helping out like an 80-year-old woman who is finding out all about her family. And we've been able to identify who her father really is, because she didn't know, or she was led to believe one thing throughout her entire life. And now that she's in her 80s, my parents are like, we need to find the truth for her before she dies, because like we owe it to her at this point in her life. But to find out that, your sibling is really your parent, or to find out that your dad went off and had a whole other family without you, or any number of these stories, this is traumatizing. This is legitimately shocking to people. And in this day and age, as we say, of genetic testing, this information is much more easily accessible. And with the internet being what it is, you can find these people much more readily. But I don't think that lessens the impact any. And to find out that your family history is not what you believed it was. Even something as simple, going back to the genetic testing thing, even something as so simple as growing up thinking, oh, I'm German. My whole family is, we're German, and this is sort of very, who we are. And then you take a DNA test and find out you're a little German, but you're actually like Russian. Now this opens up a whole host of questions. Did my grandmother lie to me? Did they know what's going on here? These sorts of things can really do a number on your psyche. And like I said, as somebody who's been through the genetic testing and been doing the research to get a whole slew of information over the last 20 years about my family history that I was previously unaware of, I won't say it's very shocking to me personally, because it didn't necessarily disrupt my sense of identity. but it still made me question, okay, well, what were these stories I was told growing up? Because we weren't playing with a full deck, or we didn't have all the pieces to the puzzle, so to speak.
Yeah, it's one of those situations. If you're going to use that analogy of needing to have all the pieces or playing with a full deck when it comes to any game, uh, I think it leads to the question of how are you playing the cards? You can only play what you're dealt. So, man, oh man, this is the type of heavy thing where if you're not careful, you will potentially wreck a lot of things. You'll not just, I know you and our job is to focus on the psyche, but the whole point of the psyche is not just for yourself, it's for the relationships that you have. And this can alter a lot of the relationships that you have. As you said, what if it really was a secret? What if one person intentionally was hiding that information, but then because it was the type of information that other people needed to know, everyone else believed the falsehood. So you weren't the first person to hear it. You just ended up being the person finding it out. What if the person that was hiding it was otherwise someone that really was supposedly the person that knew everything? Now the question becomes, once again, are you stupid or are you corrupt? And by I'm saying that colloquially. I don't mean like, are you unintelligent? I'm saying, let me change it then. Are you naive? Did you just simply do this in a way that you thought was going to be beneficial and it wasn't? Or was this a situation where, heaven forbid, it was a dark family secret that you were told as a young child? If you tell anybody else about this, the family is going to have significant negative impact because of ethnicity, because of race, because of criminal background, because of a lot of other things that maybe generations later we wouldn't ever know. And what if that information is the information that's lost to time? What if nobody has that information now? Now all of a sudden that person is a pariah in the family because they withheld information and they've passed on. Now all of a sudden, if you find out later because of archives of different materials in their attic or whatever, you actually find out there's a really good reason. Now, do things have to change again? Do you have to change your entire mindset about that particular person that was withholding the information? These are all things that people actually do go through in their families, and it's not my place to say.
Imitation of life.
Yeah, I mean, there's no way to say automatically what's right or what's wrong, but the reality is, it's always going to change. We're always going to find things that we didn't know before. The more you dig into history, the more you realize that there are so many subtle nuances to circumstances that we can't keep track of. So many things have to be filtered, and it's human nature to process things this way. It's often not malicious at all. And it's not much different than how our genetics are coded. We are going to pass along DNA ad infinitum as long as we are a species until one of two things happens. Either we are going to end up with enough variations that there are going to be some other species that are a lot like us, but do things just a little differently. And we are either going to find a way to make that work together, or we're going to kill each other. And I'm not saying that pejoratively. I'm saying that because that's the way we have existed. That's what happened with Neanderthals. That's literally our existence. We just aren't aware of it in the now because we don't have to do that. And hopefully, and yes, I'm saying that selfishly, hopefully that is centuries or even millennia from now, so we don't have to worry about it. But if we start doing cloning and we start allowing for an increase in those adaptations to happen at a much more rapid pace, oh boy, now we might be introducing something else that we hadn't considered before. What if we're just going on to the next man or woman or whatever, and we're doing it at a breakneck speed that we can't see because in evolution, breakneck still means hundreds of years. So I know you said that the next 20 years are going to be fascinating, and the next 2,000 are probably going to be illuminating, and neither one of us are going to be around for it. But to bring it back to the whole family point, we are never going to know the truth. That's a scary thing to say. We know what we've been told, and we know what we've told ourselves. Lots of people can work on the first part. Nobody can work on the second part.
Well, I don't know that we've done an episode, thematic, character, or otherwise, where we have just hammered so many points, just one right after the other. And yet we still haven't technically discussed treatment. So we're going to pause for a quick break. We get back, we're going to discuss potential treatment for in and out of universe in a somewhat expedited fashion so as to not drag this on any longer than it has to be. So stick around. We'll be right back.
Hey, Jen.
Hey, Micah.
Remember watching the Friends premiere?
No, I never saw that.
Oh, but remember those first Wu-Tang solo albums that came out?
No, I don't.
Remember that terrible Frasier theme song?
Oh my god. Remember I was sent away from home when I was 16, sent to like the middle of nowhere, Montana, therapeutic boarding school. None of this rings a bell?
Oh, yeah.
Join us for I Never Saw That, a podcast about mid-90s pop culture and Montana.
What about ER? You saw that though, right?
No!
Hi, I'm Saladin Ahmed, and this is Capes on the Couch.
And we're back. So in an effort to speed things up, and also because this is a thematic episode, we're not really going to go into in-universe versus out-of-universe. We'll focus more on treatments for the originals and treatments for the clones. So I'll let you start off with the originals.
For the originals, the best construct we have right now is in terms of family systems. So the idea would be, how comfortable are you with the idea that there is a human being in this world that a lot of people are going to attribute to you, and you didn't have much of a say in it? So an example would be, you find out from Maury you are the father. That's an example. The processing of unexpected but major biological family-related events can lead to significant anxiety and depression. So the focus, first of all, is don't lose your sense of self. In other words, I bring it back to the basics of CBT. So antecedent, belief, and consequence. In this case, antecedent. Last time I checked, you are who you were yesterday. The belief that we have to find is still a black box. The consequence is you now have this other person you're aware of. And what do you do with that? So if the original belief has to do with, I think the information is wrong, then we're dealing with like kind of the strife situation. Like, ooh, okay, we may have to be a little more intense. There may be some medication involved because you're going to have to get back into connection with the reality, with the information that you have at hand. If the belief, hopefully, is much more along the lines of, what does this mean for me? Am I a different person now? Or I am, heaven forbid, less of a person? That can be depression. Or I don't know if I can do the same things I did before because of this new information. Okay, that can be anxiety provoking. Either way, those types of beliefs can be worked on with CBT the same way they always can, which is you provide direct examples. Okay, now that this person is in your life, have you made a change to where you live? Most people will say no. Are you making a change to your job? Most people will say no. So you're giving the reality, once again, that you're grounding. That can be a very simple technique. What if, though, the person wants to be more involved with this other person? Now, that's much more involved. And now you really do have to go much more into potentially more of a psychodynamic realm, or a family therapy realm, because you're going to incorporate that person. That's a different story. And I'm not going to get into the details of that, but you could kind of see where that would go, because now you're actually doing much more interpersonal work. To flip it, you're the clone. Okay, once again, the original idea. If you're going from a base of no knowledge and finding out new information, then that's a shock to the system. That's a trauma. It doesn't have to be a major trauma, but there's a good chance that it may be. If that's the case, then once again, question is, what are you doing with the information at hand? If your belief is now, I cannot be the person that I was, then the question becomes, are you willing to find out what that person is? You actually have some homework to do, because that usually comes with the idea that other people had expectations for you. And here's the shocking part, the idea that you can reject other people's expectations and still have a whole sense of self. I know I'm making it sound really simple and really short for the sake of the episode, but holy crap, is that a lot of work? That's the type of thing that takes months. That's not something that comes easily, because usually there's this anticipation of obligation towards others that doesn't necessarily have to be there. On the other hand, if the person has created damage to their own life with consequences because they acted out and basically said, screw all you guys, I don't want to deal with any of this, and now they're isolating or things like that, then there's more of an integrative approach. Once again, getting back to the interpersonal, the world is not meant to be lived completely on an island. And how do you introduce the idea that just because this one person is now considered, quote unquote, the original you, that's okay. There's nothing wrong with the remix. So that's as short as I can make it. But oh, wow. Anytime these sorts of things come up with family dynamics, we know that it's going to take a while. And then I'll bring up the very last point. If you're talking about the two people coming together, then you need to find the proper person that can manage that on a regular basis, because that is definitely not in my wheelhouse, and I will not pretend.
Got to know your strengths and got to know your weaknesses. So then the clones, or for the treatment for the second version, the remix, what have you, what do you say to that person? Or what do you say to the person who didn't know the whole history of their family until very recently? How do you cope with that stuff?
A lot of that is much more on the supportive side. It's not necessarily having to, I'll admit, I'm kind of fumbling a little bit with this one, because I have to be careful with how I say this. I have to validate every emotion that that person has, because it's their right to have that experience. They can be as angry as they want. They can be as sad as they want. They can be as shocked, scared, all of it. There's no right or wrong response. Having said that, I've had patients who develop an obsession. What you were describing, Anthony, is not obsessive. I'm glad that your parents have that type of hobby. I'm glad that they're able to reach out to people and do some good in the world with it. There are some people that this is something that they will not let go, and they will make it their mission, in the sense of they get so paranoid. They just can't trust anything that's ever said to them about anything relating to their family or related to their history, their past. They start distrusting even themselves. It can lead to severe dissociation. It can go that far. My job is not to necessarily tell them what's right or what's wrong. It's to make sure that they stay in what actually is a very broad path of acceptable emotional reactions and not get to that dark point. It doesn't have to be as focused as saying, okay, well, let's create the new you. Like, make sure that you have yourself or whatever. It doesn't have to be like that. It could be much more broad. If it's severe shock and anger, okay, well, let's get you on a way to release that. What's your exercise routine? Real basic. If it's depression, okay, well, what can we do, medication or not, help you develop, something that allows you to sleep, just making sure that they stay in the moment and find ways to live a day-to-day life, rather than what really is an existential crisis that if you haven't gone through, and I'm not pretending I have not gone through, but if you haven't gone through, you know that there's a certain level that you won't be able to connect with immediately.
Well, I hope that none of us have to go through that kind of an existential crisis, but I would be naive in saying that it won't happen to anyone. It's just, some of this stuff is just really, really, this whole episode is just way headier than I thought it was going to be. And Matt said that there's a lot of meat on this bone, and we've gone on, I think at this point, this is going to be one of our longest episodes ever, frankly. And yet there's still so much that we didn't talk about. We could do multi-parts on this.
Dude, there are weeks-long conventions on the bioethics of cloning as it is, from people that are way more experienced and smarter than you or I. And even then, it gets into a lot of shouting matches. So the idea that two guys on a, relatively small podcast are going to talk about all the angles, no way. Don't worry about it.
You mean we can't possibly hit everything that there is to talk about? I'm shocked and dismayed. Like I said, in order to avoid having this go on for far too long and ended up turning this into like a 2-hour episode, we're going to end it here. Suffice to say, cloning is bad. Okay. Don't clone people. Okay. You shouldn't clone. You also shouldn't smoke marijuana. Okay.
And I'm going to go ahead and I'll go on the totally opposite side and say, look, man, if you want to really get a great life insurance scheme, make sure that you clone yourself at around age 18 so that you still qualify for the best rates. Make sure it's on yourself, and, just let that one person know in their hidden area that nobody else knows about where that policy is. And, they can enact it as soon as you, off yourself, but don't let anybody know, because that way you get the money and the next clone just multiplies it. And, in about 2 or 3 generations with nobody ever knowing it because they're the perfect clone of you, you're sitting pretty, dude.
Wow. And I think sometimes that I could be a super villain, but I'm grateful that I use my powers for good. That is straight up Lex Luthor villainy type shit right there. That is beautiful is what that is.
It wouldn't even qualify as suicide because the person is still alive.
Wow. I am in awe of you, sir. I am in awe of your brilliance. That's...
Oh, you thought I was joking about those nodal, other doctor issues in different locations? Oh, I'm sorry. No. Okay. Oh, wait, hold on. Let me just... I apologize. I'll kill the joke. I'm
really
not...
Don't kill the joke. It's a joke. Everybody knows it's a joke, man.
Dude, nowadays, I really am being careful.
Oh, come on. I think even our listeners know that you're full of it.
If you thought for a nanosecond about doing that, anybody out there, you are not alone, and help is out there. And you're not alone because of the cloning. That's it. That's my pun. No word puns. That's it. I'm done.
There you go. So, recommended reading then is read the Clone Saga if you can stomach your way through it. Read some of the Jean Grey, Madelyne Pryor, Cyclops stories, as wacky as they are. I would say read The Death and Return of Superman. It's a great story, and you can read more about Kon-El, Superboy. Don't call him Superboy. Connor Kent. Yeah, don't call him Superboy. That's a bad idea. And read Whatever Happened to the Man of Tomorrow, because Bizarro doesn't have a big role in it, but he's in there. And I think it's a very good version of the Bizarro character. But it's Alan Moore, so it's going to be a good, compelling story. So next episodes are Catwoman, as selected by Ariel. No surprise there. Levana Blackburn, as selected by Ruby from a series of books. So we're looking forward to that. It's a little bit off the beaten path, but I've started reading, and it's a very interesting book so far. And Superman Red Sun is Brian's last pick as a present level patron. And he's going out with a bang because I love that story and I cannot wait. We can just dive right in on that one. There's a whole host of characters, a very self-contained story, which I love. There's not a whole lot to talk about, so we can just, give the summary and then just dive right into the issues because it's a very self-contained story. And so then, as we said at the top of the show, there is a present level slot open. So patreon.com/capes on the couch. You can subscribe at the $10 level. Somebody unlock that and you can pick a character every month or a theme or whatever you want us to do an episode on. You let us know and we'll do it. You can find all of our episodes on our website, our new revamped website at www.capesonthecouch.com. We are on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Capes on the Couch. And we've got a TeePublic site, which you can now go to capesonthecouch.com/merch. And that will bring you to a link to the TeePublic site. So it's much easier than having to go through the whole tpublic.com/user/Capes on the Couch, yada, yada, yada. So that's going to wrap it up. Doc already gave us pun, and this episode is dragged on long enough as it is. And at the risk of repeating ourselves in an episode about cloning, for Doc Issues, I'm Anthony Sitko. Thank you for listening. We will see you next week.
Capes on the Couch podcast is for entertainment purposes only. Dr. Issues is a psychiatrist, but he is not your psychiatrist and does not have knowledge of your individual situation. For any personal mental health concerns, please consult your own healthcare providers. For medical emergencies, please call 911 or the designated number in your area immediately. Remember that you are not alone and help is out there.